I'm Gunjan Chandra. I'm a researcher, a PhD researcher at University of Oulu. I'm working for Biomimetics and Intelligent Systems Group at the Faculty of ITEE, which is Information Technology and Electrical Engineering. This is my first year of doing my doctoral research, and I have a funded project from HTx.
Okay, good. When you started your PhD?
Officially, I started it last year in the autumn. Yeah, but I have been working on my PhD unofficially the year before that as well.
Okay. During your master thesis, it was already the same subject?
Yes, pretty similar. My master thesis was about data synthesis for the data sharing of like medical data. So it was pretty similar. And then after that, I started working on, I was still working for HTx at that time. And then I continued working on for about a year until I got my official PhD study rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and how did you landed on this field of research?
I was pretty inspired with the healthcare and everything since the very beginning. Even though I was a computer science engineer, I wanted to really help in the healthcare field. So I was like, why not combine both? And I reached out to my current employer about my interest, and they were already working on as a collaborator in HTx, and they were like, we have a perfect project for you. Then I was like, sure, let's do my thesis.
Wow. Okay. So have you also have you ever worked on, let's say, on this data engineering part of let's say of the healthcare field, or have you ever been also on anything related to development of medicines or medical devices?
Not in the devices part, but I have been working as a data analyst for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. For private companies, or always for, let's say, public institutions, academia?
I was working for a digital marketing firm before starting my master's. So I do have an experience in data analysis there. And then I started my master's and got my interest in healthcare. Then I worked a lot on video images of the patients. So my first project was related to analyzing heart rate, detecting heart rate from facial videos. So a lot of machine vision, and then I moved to this research group, and then I've been working with type 1 diabetes, now with type 2 diabetes, and in future, different kind of diseases as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So Gunjan Chandra, PhD candidate for the University of Oulu.
Yeah.
And what's your part? That will be, let's say, the first question I would have for you. What's your part of work in the HTx project, and what's the expected outcome, or what are the expectations from your point of view, from the point of view of your research perspective of this whole project?
Okay, so University of Oulu in HTx, we are trying to build prediction models for improving healthcare. So basically like a support system for clinical practitioners, like a decision support system. So what we are trying to do is detect how a patient is going to be in coming future, like how their health is going to be, whether it's going to improve or deteriorate. So we can we can select patients, and we can focus more on those whose health is at higher risk of deteriorating, for example, in type 2 diabetes. And then eventually we are also working on precision medicine, which is like personalized treatment. So we have different medication for lowering your blood glucose, for example. And we know that one size does not fit all. We have been using these treatment for a long time, and we are going to use artificial intelligence to detect how a particular patient, what their situation is, including their clinical features, their treatment, what are the other medication, underlying conditions they have, and including their environmental factors like their socioeconomic condition, where do they live, and things like that to personalize the treatment for that particular patient. So eventually,
please go on.
Yeah, so eventually, if we are hoping by the end of the HTx project, we will be able to provide a system which is going to help medical practitioners to use this model and basically administer the treatment.
Okay, so we can imagine from the perspective of a lay person that a patient can go to his or her practitioner and, let's say, expecting their practitioner to use this particular tool, or this particular tool running on the software or on the, let's say, yeah, the input-output system you are preparing to predict what's the best treatment for the specific patients?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, but prior to that, should we imagine also that the practitioners, of course, should have the personal medical records of this patient?
Yes. So even a nurse can also sort out what kind of patients need what kind of treatment or attention. So when we have electronic health records of the patient, we can use that data to put into the system, and we will get the idea of, okay, this patient is going to have some health problem coming in the future because our model predicts that there's a higher chance for that. We always work on probabilities. We are never certain when it comes to machine learning. So when we have the probability, okay, they are going to more likely to suffer from these conditions, so we can focus more on improving or personalizing their treatment, or even we can find out what are the factors affecting this possible. So because our model is also able to explain, so we are also working on explainable AI. So for example, if a patient has a very high BMI, and when we put into the system, for example, from 30 and we reduce it to 20, we can see that how much their health, like the chances of deteriorating, decreases. And this is just an example. So we can also motivate patients to work on their diet and exercising. So we can also refer them to a dietitian to help support that and reduce the risk. And another thing I forgot to mention that we are also working on, which is cost when it comes to treatment. So we are also going to work that, yes, maybe certain treatment is going to help a patient, but not everybody can afford it. So we are also going to consider that into account to make sure that we are giving the treatment which is not only feasible, but is also doable for the patient.
Okay, and that matter of costs, I guess, is very specifically embodied in a given healthcare system, so it may change country by country.
Yeah.
And here, I guess, comes the difficulty of building a model that can, let's say, adapt to different contexts, isn't it?
Yeah, that is, we call transferability of a model. So if a model works in one cohort, let's say we are building a model based on patients from Finland, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in another country too. And we have actually found that many times in our studies that we have a model of predicting how their life is going to be from a Dutch study. And we used our data on their model and it did not work. So that is a very big question and a problem that we are constantly trying to tackle. The one way we can tackle this when we have a data from all different countries. So in that way, we can have a very big model which is able to learn and adapt to that continent, or we can have individual models for different patients. But I really think that if we have data from a larger cohort, is a better way, because even if someone lives in a particular country, they can be migrated from different countries. And that really plays another part because of their living style, their genetics, and things like that.
And does the same challenge apply to the possible extension of your model to other diseases than diabetes? I imagine the same problem occurs when you have to, say, transfer or extend your model to other diseases, if that's in any way possible.
Yeah, the challenge is there, but most of the time you can definitely adapt your model as the new data comes in. We call it like active learning.
Okay, we are going into that because that's very interesting. And let's say, taking 1 minute more about the issue of cost. As you can imagine, that patients are who lives, of course, in different systems. Some systems are very privileged in Europe, some others are not. And they know that they feel like the matter of cost as one of the top priority for them. And let's say I can then imagine that your model is not just for a single practitioner to be used in the discussion, in dialogue with a single patient, but also for policymakers. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, I guess we go back to the same challenge. So how we can make this model fit for a larger scale. Am I right?
Yes. So the only solution is having a large scale data. Okay. Because the model's limitation is defined by the data that is used to train the model. And that data we call ground truth, because that is, we have as a fact, because we have followed with those patients and have seen how their life has progressed over time. So the more information we have, the more confident a model becomes.
Okay. So we are talking about training a model. So yes. Is that also, let's say, something related to data engineering, artificial intelligence, and machine learning? Are we in the same field?
Yes.
Okay. Let's explain, please, about what you were mentioning, explainable AI or machine learning, predictions. What we can imagine behind these expressions, this wording. So we can imagine, of course, that there is a software processing databases or information from databases, and how we can then imagine this model of the software learning, matching different profiles, different patient situations, or making predictions. What should we imagine behind this? Should we imagine something like when we ask Google Maps to find the best way, the best itinerary to some place? We see Google Maps proposing us different options. So you can commute, you can go by feet, you can take your car, different options. So also maybe based on the traffic situations, or Google Maps can alert you if there is a strike in public transport, so you have to take another pathway. So is that something similar or completely different? And let's say, what can we imagine behind these words that maybe, I wouldn't say scare, but let's say make many people think about, oh, I'm going towards something I don't know at all what it is about, or what does it mean?
You are right. It is very similar. So the Google Maps also takes a few things into consideration: the traffic, the mode of transport that you have, and give you the best suited path, and gives you the option to select from. So it is similar, but then it also depends on whether you're using an algorithm which that we can unpack, which is let's say a proper equation that you can solve, and what exactly is happening. And then on the other hand, we have neural networks. We call them black box. So in those, we don't exactly know what happens. How does it come to that conclusion. We are working on unpacking that black box, which is something that we call explainable AI. And we can see what are the things which influence the model, but even now we don't know exactly why it said that. So yes, we take few things like, oh, you have this age, your gender is this, and this is the condition you have, and you also have this condition. So a model will consider those things and then will give you a prediction. And how did the model come to that prediction depends whether you're using a neural network or you're using something like a discriminant analysis, where we can really tell exactly how and why the model said that. And in the first place, when we talk about training, so this is something we use, as I said, like a ground truth. So model goes through the data, sample by sample, and then learns if someone has this and this and this, so this is the one thing that is likely to happen because we gave it the answer. So every time, for example, let's take an example of machine vision. So we show the computer a photo of a cat and we tell the computer it's a cat. And then we do it repeatedly. And then we also tell the computer, like, show a photo and we say, it's not a cat, it's a dog. Or not even say that, but just say it's not a cat. So over time, a model learns. And then when we show a photo, a model will tell us whether it's a cat or not. And how the model works, it learns most probably like, oh, it has pointy ears, it has a tail, it has 4 legs, and it has a certain texture. So in a similar way, when we talk about healthcare data, model also learns in things like this. It picks up cues. Oh, when we have these things, this is how you're going to help, going to be. We call it finding a clinical twin, like not even a twin, but very close to what we already have in the data. And that is something, another thing that we see when we find anomalies or outliers. So our data was trained on a model which has these information. And then all of a sudden, we have a feature which has an extreme value or something that was not in the range. So a model can be confused at that time and is highly likely to give you a wrong prediction because it never learned those numbers.
Okay, I see that point as very interesting because in some way, any patient can feel him or herself as an outlier, so as a unique case, also because we know that the real clinical practice is very different from the context or the setting of a clinical trial, very controlled and so on. So I guess here comes the potential of real world evidence. And from the patient perspective, there's really something that can change the game, as we know that for patients who have, for example, no options or very few, they know there will never be a clinical trial for them to test and to inform policymakers about their treatment, especially in rare diseases, where there are very small populations and very difficult conditions to test new products, but also for patients that have now many options and are obliged to, let's say, to take very complex treatment pathways. So combining and recombining their treatments, finding the best series of treatment, the best sequences, or to switch treatment at some point, but without knowing what's the best point of the switch. So I guess here comes the potential of, let's say, real world evidence, what we call real world evidence. And I would say, are you working with databases that are, let's say, provided by hospitals from Finland or from also other jurisdictions?
So the data set that I have is basically a population data from the government-based healthcare, Kela, in Finland, and then it's a real world data. These are not the clinical trials. So the patient.
Sorry, I lost you for a couple of seconds because I don't know, maybe my connection is not very good, but
okay.
I just lost for a couple of seconds. If you can repeat this.
Okay, so I was saying the data that we have is a real world data. It's not a clinical trial, and it's from the North Karelia region in Finland. And so it's basically the data provided and recorded from the centralized healthcare system in Finland.
Okay.
So we have electronic health records of patients. And you were mentioning about the difference in clinical trial and the real world data. Yes, there is a difference many times, most likely when we do a study on clinical trial, it's not as straightforward and simple when we start handling the real world data because of many factors. Even though in clinical trial, they try to select randomly the patients to have a more diverse cohort, but still it is not always possible that they did reach that. We always find a patient which does not fit in that pool. And in the real world data, we have a very diverse cohort. And we often also struggle with missing values because when you're doing a clinical trial, you make sure that you have all the information from each patient. So you don't come across this problem of missing data. In real world, yes, sometimes a doctor did not take the weight of the patient, for example, because it was not necessary or things like that. And when we are using the real world data to train our model, and the weight is important for our model to predict. So we also work on things like imputation. So we learn how our data is, we take the whole data set, and then we learn what is the pattern of the weight. So we have many different techniques how to impute a value. We can take an average, mean, median, or a constant value, or we can also drop the feature, which does happen when we have a lot of missing values in a particular feature.
Okay, and really out of my curiosity, have you ever had the chance to talk maybe to representatives of let's say public agencies responsible for health technology assessment or for decision makers? Some of them are partners in our project. Have you ever had a chance to discuss with them and about their feeling, their perspective on the use of real world data? And I was curious about what their reaction looked like about your work. So do they feel that that's really an improvement for them, that you are really doing something useful for them? Or have you ever seen in them the same fear that we can imagine can come from the public? So the fear of data inconsistency, the fear that the information they may, let's say, obtain from these processes are not as well as they are used to work on, or something like that. Do you find them, let's say, more in an open mindset, or with some, or say, with some concern or worries, or maybe more, let's say, how could I say that, more cautious about the work you're doing?
So I personally have not had a conversation with like someone who is working in this sector, but I am aware of the conversation that do happen, because the one data that we were working on was collected in the hospital, and the person who was responsible for collecting data, they do talk to us. They understand the disease, they understand they're running the trials, but they don't understand exactly what we are doing. And even us who are working on this, the concern is always there, because healthcare data is very sensitive, and the GDPR is there to make sure that we are doing everything in the right way. We have taken the consent, we are working on things. And another reason that it does become a bit like, okay, we are not sure, because when we start working with neural networks, we can't fully unpack why it's saying that. So that also brings the question of, can we fully trust this? So yes, the concern is there, the question is there, regardless of whether it's ourselves or someone who gave us the data, or even the patients themselves. And we are trying our best constantly to make sure that we can explain what exactly is happening and provide the information that it's not just the decision did not, like the prediction did not come out of nowhere. It does make sense. And we are, there have been so many studies which have been done and they came to the prediction and they have been applied in the real world. And we have already seen that it does work, it's improving. And also sometimes it doesn't work. So yes, the suspicion, the concern is there because at the end, it's a new field. It's emerging now. It's the process, and it's better to be cautious than reckless because we are really talking about healthcare here. We are talking about real people. We are talking about their health and their well-being. So it is, I would say, the concern is a good thing here.
Okay. And do you feel that from a scientific point of view, there is this openness to the use of real-world data for, let's say, for final decision, because we are talking about cases where you may have real-world data only to take a decision. Do you feel like there is more opening in that sense, really from a strictly scientific point of view?
So when we work with real-world data, we know for a fact that it is more likely to give us a better results than when we done in clinical trials. I mean, yes, clinical trials definitely work as well. We approve medications depending upon clinical trials because they have been studied very well. So I'm not talking about designing that. I'm talking about when we trying to administer a treatment. So we need the real world values. We know that not everyone have the same situation as someone who was in the clinical trial. And another thing is that we can combine these two information. So currently what I'm working on in my new project, the one that we are studying is predicting how someone's HbA1c value is going to be after one year after initiating a new drug in reducing the blood glucose value in type 2 diabetes. So we have the models which learns on the real world data and gives us the prediction. And it's already performing very well. And what we are trying to do is include the clinical trial results of how, when they studied the patients and gave them the medication, how much it affected them. So we are trying to combine those information with the real world data to give our model more confidence. So they don't have to be either or. They can definitely work together and help make the model perform even better.
Wow, that's interesting. That's interesting, and gives us a very, let's say, broad perspective, which can fit, let's say, in the situation we are currently living in, this kind of research for the better way of generating the evidence we need for decisions, and it's very interesting. Can we then imagine that you working on a very common disease like diabetes can also benefit from other diseases that are, let's say, that may have more complex settings, talking about, for example, rare diseases where we have small populations, or in other cases, multiple sclerosis where you have different options for a patient, like I said, very concerned about the risk of relapsing and the better choice at the best choice at best moment to prevent this risk. And do you feel like the work you're doing is also going to, let's say, lay the ground for a benefit in other disease fields?
Okay, so the diabetes that I'm working on first, it's a systemic disease. So when a person do have diabetes, they're more likely to have other underlying health condition as well. So we not only focus on that, we also focus on making sure that other conditions are, like if the model works, other conditions are taken care of as well. Obesity is a part of it. So as I was explaining, so we can also refer to that, yes, they are maintaining their weight. And the second is we are also working on different diseases as well. So I'm soon going to start working on an orphan disease, MDS. And my colleague is already has started working on multiple sclerosis. So the both of them that you mentioned. And even though when we have an orphan disease, we have a small data set, yes. So the data set that I'm going to have is going to have only around 400 samples. So the size of data does affect how a model is going to perform, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to work. In machine learning, the most important thing is the data. If you don't have a good data, the model is not going to work. It just can't, because it truly is dependent on the data itself. When we talk about building a model, we spend more time working with the data than actually building the model itself, because we have to pre-process, prepare our data to be fit into the system. So yes, data plays a part, and different diseases have different challenges, and we can adapt our model to that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, of course it does. It does, and it is exactly, let's say, the question to be explored, whether what we are building can fit this very complex situation, which are in some way among the first targets for research like the one conducted by HTx. So as these diseases raise the more challenging questions, of course, those are also the fields where we need more response, more effort in generating the evidence that we need to take decisions. But I really thank you for the comprehensiveness and the let's say the perspective you gave us in your answers.